In this video, I'm going to cover a new piece for Grimsley Village called Moldy Morty's Market. It's full of all kinds of creepy and spooky food, as well as characters and a spooky dark atmosphere. So let's get started. The core of the project is made using a kit, and it's one of the easy tongue and groove systems that the walls and ceiling and all fit together. And it comes with a base, which is also your floor, two sides, the back, the roof, and then the front. And on the front, you have a large window opening, you have a door, and that door comes out, and then you also have a transom area that you can open up at the top. Now, what I did is I started by assembling the back, the sides, and the floor, because I want to be able to paper on the inside before I put the other pieces in place, because I figured it'd be a lot easier. In terms of the paper I used for this project, I used a combination of the Halloween papers you see here called Masquerade that are 12 by 12. Then I used the 6 by 6 version for smaller areas, with the 12 by 12 being used for the larger scale areas. And then also a pack of wood type papers that are 6 by 8. And you'll see I used those on the outside. I also did use a couple of other 12 by 12 sheets for both the floor and then the base of a larger base that I used for the project. On the inside, you can see I have papered the walls with the 12 by 12 Halloween paper pack. And then on the floor, that's just a individual 12 by 12 sheet, a wood sheet of dark colored wood for that. And I also used some more of that type of paper. It's a different pattern for a larger base that I built for all of this to sit on. Now on the outside, I used the wood paper, and I cut the paper up, the different colors, up in half-inch strips, and then pieced those strips together. And I thought that made it a lot more interesting. And I just covered the back, and then I covered the front, because I'm going to use some bay windows on the sides that will completely cover the sides. So you really don't need to bother, if you're going to do the same thing I did, you don't really need to bother covering the sides of the structure. Here you can see the front, and you can get a better idea of what it looks like as I'm piecing together the strips of wood. And then you see the completed front. And you can also see that around each of the door and the transom and the window, there is a very thin wood-like trim. And I have a collage sheet for you that has those strips on it. And I made them a color that worked really well with the wood paper. Now, a tip for papering: when you're going to paper before you put the thing together, because it's got the tongue and groove system, you have to be mindful for where the tongues are, the parts that stick up. And so the rule is, if the thing you're papering is going to be on the inside, then stop your paper before it covers up those tongues. And then on the outside, when you're papering, go past the tongues all the way to the top. So that's true of the roof and the front as well as the walls. And if you do it that way, then when you go to put it together, now that everything's got its paper on it, you will not have blocked anything, so that you can set that roof down right on the tongues, and you can push the front in right on the tongues of the structure. So inside, don't cover the tongues. Outside, do cover the tongues. For the glass in the windows, I used sheets of acrylic, 12 by 12 sheets of acrylic, and they come in a multi-pack. I bought mine a few years ago, and you can find those on the internet. You can find them at craft stores. I'll give you a link to Amazon. They sell the 12 by 12 sheets. So at least you get an idea of what they are, and then you can figure out if you want to buy them, where you want to buy them. Another option would be to use transparency film, the kind that you put through your printer and print on. The only thing I would tell you about that in terms of tips is the one side that the ink prints on has a chemical coating on it. And if you get anything onto the film and you want to wipe it off, let's say, you get some glue on it or something like that, you cannot do anything to that side, because if you put any moisture on it whatsoever, it'll start glopping up, and it'll start looking smoky. So you just want to be careful if you're using the transparency film. And I would use the other side, the side that doesn't have the chemical on it, as the out-facing side. So that way, if at some point you need to wipe your windows or something like that, they get dusty, then you're not touching that back side that you can easily, mess up. Now I added 2 bay windows to the sides of the market structure. And just like with the main structure, these are a kit that you can fold up and glue the tabs together. It comes with one big piece that's the main body. Then it comes with 2 shelves that you can glue inside, and then a little roof. I started by painting the main piece black. I just spray painted it. It makes it easy and fast, and I did both sides. The inside is going to remain black. I'm not going to paper it, but the outside I will be adding paper, but that way at least all my edges and all were black as well. So it was easier to do that. And if you look at this diagram here, it shows you what parts are what. So you're looking at the outside. So this would be folded inside and glued together. And if you look at the biggest opening, that opening goes in the back. So the window tapers to the front. So it's smaller in the front than it is in the back. And then you've got 2 side openings and then a front opening. And then you can see I've pointed out all the different tabs that you will use to glue that whole piece together. Now, in terms of papering the outside, what I did was I used a piece of the 12 by 12 paper, and then I tore away pieces of it. I first cut panels that were the sizes of all of the areas that are going to be on the outside. So the 2 small side areas, and then the smaller opening that goes in the front. And then, of course, I don't have to worry about the one in the back, which is the largest opening. And so I cut strips, and then I tore away pieces of it. And then behind that, I put pieces of brick. Now, that brick coordinates really nicely with the paper set. So I also have that for you on my blog that you can download for free and use that if you like, or use it for any project that you want. But that's where you can find that. And then, of course, I inked all the edges. I glued those in place, and then with an X-Acto knife, I cut away the paper from the openings. Now here you can see how it folds together, and I've just got it clipped for now because I really want to fill the inside first before I actually glue all the tabs together. And just like with the front of the market, you can see I've used the acrylic behind the windows, and I've also used that little trim that I told you about that would be on my blog that you could print out, and it also coordinates well with these papers and this brick. And then that big back opening, I put a piece of decorative paper back there because you'll be able to see that through the windows. And I used the smaller scale paper, the 6x6 paper pack for that. So in terms of the roof, I decided that I wanted lighting in the market. So I wanted to add some little electric tea lights, battery operated tea lights. And what I did was use the tea lights, the circumference of the tea lights to mark a circle, and then a smaller circle within that, and that's what I need to cut away for the light part, the actual flame part, to stick through there. Now, the one thing you'll want to be cognizant of is what's going to be inside your market, because I'm going to have a big shelving unit against the back wall. I need the lights towards the front so that they have room to hang down. So you can see here, I've got my circles, I've cut out the center part, and now I'm going to paper both sides. And the rule for papering the roof is exactly the same as the rule for papering the main structure, which is that whatever the top of the roof is going to be, the outside, you go past the tongs. On the inside are the tongues. On the inside, you don't want to go past the tongues. You want to stop just short of those. And then you can see it papered. Of course, I have to repunch my holes. I've papered both sides. And then you can see how they're going to stick through. And then I will have to create a little cover for that because I don't want you to be able to see that from the outside. Here you can see the little box cover that I built for the roof to cover the lights, and just made it out of chipboard, 4 sides and a top. And if you want to do the same kind of thing with lighting, you'll just have to use the measurements to fit what you do. So it wouldn't make any sense for me to give you mine because you might have them spaced differently. And you might also have a box already that would work that you could cut down or is just the perfect size. It's kind of like the size of a long jewelry box. In the back of the market, I built a cabinet. And just like the stuff I've talked about before, I've used kits to do it. And I've created this little diagram to help you understand how I put it together. I'm using 3 different sizes of items, 4x4x1, 2 of those up above on the right and the left. Then down the center, I'm using a 1.5x3x1.5 box. And then I'm using on each side at the bottom, I'm using 3 boxes on each side, 4x1.5x1.5. And these are all kits. And you can see the 3 kits that I used here. On the top is like a little bookcase kit. Now it has that little scalloped thing at the top. I did not put that on because I didn't want it to block the products that I had in the cabinet. So, but that's the ones that are up there as the large pieces on the tops on each side. And then you see the 2 different boxes, and they're basically just a box with an opening. And like I said, the diagram can show you which size I used where, and I'll have this on my blog too, so it's easy for you to reference. Here you can see the pieces constructed together, all glued together, without any items or whatever in it. And this whole thing fits really nicely on the back of that wall and just gives you, the center part doesn't quite hit the roof, just is a little bit lower than the roof. And then you see here, just like with the bay windows, I just spray painted the whole thing black, which made it so much easier to paint when you're talking about little cubbies and things. And then on the back sides, I used decorative paper. This is the paper from the 6x6 pad because I really needed a smaller scale. And I wanted to use something brighter like the white with the black polka dots because when you start putting things in there, I didn't want the items, because a lot of them are very dark too, I didn't want them to get lost against a dark background. The counter and sink is one of the few things that I built from scratch. I have the measurements here that I used, and they were based on not having it too deep, so there was a little space behind the cabinet and just a little bit space between the counter and the front window, and then long enough that it didn't block all of the doorway, because then it would be harder to see in and look at more things in the cabinet. So this is what I ended up with. The main top is 6.5 by 2.25, and I actually took 2 pieces and glued them together, heavier chipboard, and glued them together just to give more support to all the stuff I'm putting on top of it. And then the side strips are 6 3/8 by 3/4, and then the end strips are 2.25 by 3.25. So those are all my pieces. And then for the sink, I am using an Altoid tin, the small Altoid tin. I'm going to be using the bottom of it. So next, once I get my my sinks or my pieces all cut, I need to mark where the sink's going to be. And so I'm going to have it down at one end, and you can see I have flipped the chipboard over and marked the outside of the Altoid tin, and that gives me my cut area. Now, I don't want to cut through 2 layers of this. That would be really hard. So basically, I did the first one, and then I used the hole that I'd cut, the first one I marked, to mark the second one, and then cut a hole in that. So next I glued all the pieces together, and then I covered it in the wood paper. And I did exactly the same thing as I did on the outside. I cut these into small 1/2-inch strips and then pieced it all on the top and the sides. And then I just pushed, I didn't even glue it in place, I just pushed the Altoid tin into the hole, and it doesn't go quite all the way in the hole. The prongs in the back, I left them there because I thought it looked more like it was using that to attach it. And then there's that little bitty knob on the little bitty thing on the front, the little bump on the front. I left that there as well. So I pushed it down as far as I could without doing anything to those. And then you can see I've glued on a little faucet with handles. In terms of attaching the counter to the market, on the one side, I glued it to the wall, and on the other side, I stacked 2 wooden barrels, one on top of the other, glued them, and then glued them underneath, and that gives me the leg on the other end. Next, I'm going to cover all the bits and bobs and details and decor that are in all these items I've showed you how I've put together. Then I will go through the final assembly, because a lot of the stuff, you need to put it in, you need to put it where you want it before you finally put the roof on, put the front on, that sort of thing, or glue together the window. And then finally, some of the items that make up the outside scene, outside of the market. I'm going to start with the large cabinet that fits in the back of the market. And many of the containers that are in this cabinet and other places are using labels, Halloween spooky labels, from a new collage sheet of mine. I've added some collage sheets for this project. And this sheet has 40 unique food and drink labels. Like I say, they're spooky, they fit with the type of project. And they're in a variety of sizes. They range from 3/8 inch to 3/4 inch. So that way they will fit a variety of very small miniature containers. Looking at the right side of the cabinet, if you look to the top left, there are a lot of cans, little plastic cans that I've used. And to make it easier so that I didn't have to remove the existing labels from these, try to get the label off and dissolve the glue and whatnot, I decided that instead I would wrap each of the containers with a colored band, and then I could put the label on top of that, and that way I didn't have to worry about removing the old label. And what I did was I printed a bunch of strips of colored paper, and I printed it on copier paper so it's super thin and easy to mold around, a tiny container. And then I used a combination of distress ink. Now I take the re-inkers that you would re-ink the pad with, and instead I put drops of that in a spray bottle and add water. And the nice thing about distress ink is that it will mix with water, unlike alcohol ink, which will not. So I covered my containers and then spritzed it with the spray with the dissolved ink, and then I put my label on top of that. Below the cans and throughout the cabinet, there are lots of colored bottles. Now, some of the bottles I used were already colored amber, but I wanted some more colors, and so what I did is I used basically 3 different alcohol inks: caramel to give you that amber color, pesto, and then red pepper. And I create a little bath. So I take a small little cup and drip some of the ink in there, and then I use alcohol blending solution, which will thin it out and make a little bit more of a little bath. And then I can drop whatever containers or bottles that I want to stain. I can drop those in there, and I find that's easier than trying to paint them with a brush. Next, you see some crates. Those crates are just a little kit. They come in one piece. You just fold them, glue them, and you've got 2 different sizes of crates. And I just filled one of them with foliage and another one with a bunch of pumpkins. You really can't see that well. I just wanted it to look as if there was something in there. At the bottom, you'll see clear bottles. Those, just like with the colored bottles in the cans, I wrapped that with a paper and then added the label. Now, I didn't worry about putting anything in the other bottles because they're colored and it's very small, and this is in the back of the store, so you really can't tell if there's anything in the bottle, so I didn't want to waste time doing that. But when you get to the larger bottles and they are clear, then you really have to put something on them or in them. And so for the 2 on the bottom, it's werewolf fangs is the contents. And so what I did is I just shaped some pieces of polymer clay into the shape of what a fang would look like and just put those in the bottle. Now going to the right side, there are a couple of mini barrels, and I stain these barrels the same way I did the spritzing the cans, but instead of putting the ink into a spritz bottle with water, I just put it into a small container and added water to that. And then I could drop the things like the barrels, and I've used it for other things too. I could drop them in there and give them a bath and let them sit and soak, and then pull them out when I think they're dark enough. And then I can put the labels on top of those. And then next to those are plastic containers. So I did use some pre-made plastic containers where I didn't have to do anything. These are white, and I put the Scream Cheese labels on those. And so that's all I had to do to dress those up. And then below that, you see a set of books. I have another collage sheet. It's an older collage sheet that has mini witchy library, I think is what it's called. And so I just used some covers from that collage sheet to add to the cabinet. And just to fill the books, I just cut pieces of paper that are the size of the book and put those in between the cover and glue that in place. looking at the center section of the cabinet, at the top and the bottom, you will see what looks like a flour sack. Now, it had printing on the other side that, of course, I didn't want because it didn't fit the theme. And I tried to stamp on it, but with it being so soft and mushy, you just can't get a good image. So I did the same thing as I did with the bottles. I just put a strip of the colored paper around them and then added the label to that. Then in the background, above both of the sacks and above the register, you'll see a label. I used the largest of the labels on the little miniature label collage sheet to fill in that area and used it more like advertising. And then you'll see in the center is a register. I spray painted that copper, and then I took my finger and rubbed some gold on it just to give it a little bit more depth and texture and to make it look a little bit more worn as opposed to the bright gold it was, originally. Looking at the right side, you'll see a wood knob that I dropped in the ink bath to stain it. And then towards the bottom on the right side, or left side, excuse me, you'll see 2 wooden beads that I used. So beads are also another good option for containers. And on the top, the lids were something little wooden discs that I had that I stained that were in my stash. Most of the glass bottles came with cork tops, which ended up being a little too tall to fit in the cabinet. And also it didn't look as authentic. So I used some polymer clay and a couple of different size punches and punched a bunch of lids and then glued those on top of the bottles. Inside the store on both side walls, I added other items. If you look here, this is on the right side looking into the market. You'll see a bunch of posters on the wall. I also created another collage sheet which has the same labels as the miniature, but these are larger. And so they can either be used for a project that's, say, maybe larger than a 1/12 scale like this is, or you can use them like I am as posters to advertise the different products on the walls. The other thing you'll notice is a shelf unit there that has a bunch of jars with labels on them. And then below that, you'll see some instruments, the Mr. Cleaver's instruments, hanging from the wooden dowel. And then you'll see some cutting boards that are behind the instruments. They're just glued to the walls. Now, the shelving is just a spice rack that I repurposed for this, and I painted it black. And then to hang all those instruments, I used some paper. This happens to be some from my stash that's like a leather paper. It's faux leather, and it's very pliable, and I thought that would work the best, although you could use paper as well. And so I glued the strips on one side, the back side of all the instruments, and then I fished it up and over the dowel and then glued the other side to the front of the instruments. And then I ended up gluing a couple of cutting boards that I splattered with red paint so it looked like there's blood on it behind the instrument, so it made it easier to see them and they didn't blend so much into the background of the wall. On the other wall, the left wall, you'll see a couple of different shelving units. One, it's just a piece of chipboard that I wrapped with the wood paper, and to hold it up I'm using 2 skulls, and on top of that there are some bottles, some wine bottles, and some other alcohol bottles, and then of course there's posters on the wall advertising different products, and then below that is another spice rack. It's a little bit different configuration, and I had this paper dispenser that I wanted to use, and I didn't really have enough room on the counter because I already had it loaded with other stuff, so in order to be able to accommodate it, I ended up putting it on this rack, and it fit perfectly the width of it. And you can see here what that looks like. Again, it's just a simple rack, and this time instead of a wooden dowel, there's just a piece of chipboard that goes across the front. And that way I could put the paper dispenser there, and you also see a couple of bottles of roadkill sauce, as well as another one of the posters behind it. The next collage sheet that I created for this project was just a general Moldy Morty's market, and it contains a lot of signage, sandwich boards. It contains Mr. Moldy, Mr. Cleaver, and then some cookbooks, Cadaver and Digger's Graveyard Recipes, and the Ghoulish Gourmet, as well as Mr. Cleaver's cookbook. And there's just a whole bunch of other signage that will work well for this project. Here you can see one of the bay windows put together and glued, and the contents inside. So let's talk about the bottom of that bay window. And inside you see an advertisement for the Ghoulish Gourmet by Harry Hagatha, and a stack of books with the one book in the front. Then you've got on the other side sour milk. Now what I have done there is 3 cartons, milk cartons in the front are actually 3-dimensional cartons, and then the ones in the back and the ones on the sign are actually a button with a shank in the back. And so that way I used the one that's flat on the back. Of course, I cut the shanks off and glued that to the poster for the sour milk, and then I used 2 more behind the 3-dimensional one, so it looked like there was more there and gave it more depth. And then, of course, painted all green to match the sour milk advertisement. And then you've got blood coffee in a little can. And in the middle, you have extra large screaming eggs. Now, those eggs are made out of polymer clay. And how I do that is, this is kind of when I'm going to make a bunch of something and I need them to be this pretty much the same size. What I do is roll out my clay, and I use a pasta machine, so that way you get, that's completely devoted to just clay, and that way you get the same thickness all the way through. And then I use a cutter and I cut out the pieces that I'm going to use to make the eggs, and that way I get the same size. So I've got the same amount of clay for each egg. And I pretty much do that, like I said, if I'm making multiples of anything. And then the next step, and of course this is white clay, I did add a little bit of translucent polymer clay to it. Now the eggs, I just basically shaped it into a simple egg shape. That's pretty easy. And then I use a little tool. It's a little scoring tool. You can use anything that kind of has a round end to it. And I just pushed in a couple of eyes and a mouth. And then I went through and baked those. And then in those openings that I had created with the little tool, I painted the yellow. So it's like the yolk. You're looking at the yolk through the egg. Now on the top shelf are various liquor bottles with whiskey and wine and beer and all kinds of things. And of course the sign that says your favorite spirits found here. And then next to it is a stack of plastic containers, and those, I didn't do anything to those, and I just added the label for the pickled eyeballs. Now for the other bay window, on the bottom I've got Beatrix Myopia's eyeball soup. And the little round balls that you see that kind of look like gray eyeballs, where I got those is when you get, a lot of times with clothing or bedding or anything like that, you'll get the little package of silicone in it. And it'll say, you know, don't eat, dispose of, whatever it says. Open those up because they have a lot of good little ceramic and silicone beads, and they're not all the same. And so one of the packets that I had these little bitty gray beads, and sometimes they'll be little clear ones, sometimes they'll be little black ones, but they're a good source of miniature things that you can use to put inside containers. So that's what I did, and I added a little bit of glossy accents glue to give it kind of a little bit of a smoky look, you know, not so it's not completely transparent. Now again, in the back you see another one of those flower bags where I've put the paper around it and then the label, and then there's a can in the front where I've added the label embalming fluid. And then on the far right you see the green eggs, and I have in the back 3 cartons of eggs. They're plastic cartons, they're closed, and I've got the label on those. I didn't do anything to them other than add the label. And then the one in the front is actually a little metal container, and it was silver, so I painted it white, and then I painted all the little eggs within it green. On the next shelf, I have the Midnight Special Potions and Poisons, all brands, 25 to 50% off poster. And then the 2 bottles that I attached to that is just a little chipboard set, a flat chipboard set. I think it had like 10 different bottles on it. And so I've just taken those, painted them, add labels to them, and also wrapped them in the paper like I did all the other containers. Then you see 2 of the books from the book collage sheet, and then you see another one of those miniature barrels and a couple of bottles. And then some really, really tiny plastic bottles, and they came in a set of, I think, 5 little tiny bottles. And then you also see the wormy apples. Now, the wormy apples are made out of polymer clay. So I started with red clay and, again, cut out a flat piece of red clay that I ran through my pasta machine so that all the apples would be pretty much the same size. And then I just shaped them into apples, and I used the tool again to poke a hole in the side for the worm and to poke a hole in the top for the stem. Then I baked the apple. And then I also made the little worms, little green worms, which you just roll some green clay, into a roll, and then cut it every so often, and then kind of shape them and put little eyes on them. And then I did the same thing to make the stems, and then I baked those separate. And then once I had everything baked, then I inserted the worm in the apple, glued it, and the same with the stem. You just want to make sure that you make your holes big enough that it can accommodate the worm and the stem. Next, let's take a look at the stuff that is attached to the front of the store. At the bottom under the window, I have attached 4 crates, just like the crates that you saw in the bookcase or the cabinet inside the store. And in that you'll find a variety of pumpkins and squash. So the orange pumpkins and then the pumpkins that are green and orange or yellow at the bottom right I bought them that way. They come like that. But I made the other ones. I made the ones with the faces in it, the squash at the top, and I also made the green and white ones. Now to do that, first of all, I got a piece of white and 2 pieces of green, different shades, one darker than the other. And then I want to chop it all up into very small pieces, and that way I'll be able to blend it. And after I chop it up, I push it all together and just kind of make it into a ball. And at that point, you can decide, is it blended enough or not? I thought it needed another chopping. So again, I chopped, you see number 3, I chopped that up again. Then as you can see, it's even finer and the white and the other colors are mixed even better. And then I pulled it together in a ball and rolled it out and just kind of shaped it into the squash shape that you see. And then I pushed a little bit of an indentation in the top to accommodate the stem. And then the stem is just a long piece of clay. I blended a couple of colors together, just like I did to make the pumpkin or the squash part, and rolled that out and then cut it and then shaped it a little bit and put it on the top and then baked the whole thing. Now the yellow squash is made a little bit differently. I just used one color and basically shaped it into a squash, like maybe a spaghetti squash kind of shape. And then just like I did with the eggs, I used the little tool to press in some indentations for eyes and then something for the mouth. And then I baked that. And in this case, I'm going to paint the eyes in and the mouth in. And then of course the stems at the top. Again, I just rolled a long piece of clay. I blended a couple of different colors and then cut out some thicker pieces for the stems that go on the top of the heads. And then for the nose, I just took the pieces and kind of curled them. I baked those separately and then glued them on after the fact. In terms of making faces and whatnot, I have another tutorial out there, and I will give you the link where it starts that shows you all about making faces and making more complicated faces than that. So I don't want to repeat all that in this video when I have done it already in another. So I will give you that down in the description area. Over the front door hangs a lantern. The lantern is just die-cut paper that you can fold and glue together. Now, in order to hang the lantern, I needed some kind of a way to keep the chain in place. So what I came up with was what you see here on the top picture. And I've got the disc with a hole in it, and I put the eye pin through that and then snipped it off on the other side. Then I attached the chain and then made another loop so that the chain is inside the loop, and then added the jump ring to the other end of the chain. So now I have something that I can put inside the lantern, the disc that will keep it from pulling out of the lantern. Now, the other thing I had to do to make sure that I had room for the chain to come out of the lantern is that I snipped away a little bit of the tips of each section that are folded together, and that way I had enough room for that chain to come through. And then lastly, because I've got the jump ring at the end of the chain, I can now use that to hook it over the bracket that you see in the top picture, and then glue that to the front of the market. Now, those little the little areas that you see that you use for gluing it on, what I would suggest is that you glue a piece of paper on top of those to keep this in place, because those are so small and tiny. It's just not enough of a connection area for your glue. And with the weight of the actual lantern, I found that I needed to put something on top of those to give it more surface area to glue it to the front. And then the other thing you see is I decided I'd make one of my face candles, and I put 2 faces on it so that you could see each face from a different angle. And just like with the squash, I'm not going to go into detail on how I did it because I have a detailed video that shows you that. And it's the same thing that I put up before, and I will definitely have that link down in the description area. For the door, I use an image that's in the digital image set. So in addition to the 3 collage sheets, I have an image set that contains everything that's in the 3 collage sheets, plus a whole lot more images. And one of those images is the door. And I printed it twice, so I put it on each side, and then I put the acrylic in between, and the door is sized perfectly for this project. And then in terms of the handles, I used 2 skull beads, 1 on each side, and then I glued the door in place open. On the counter inside of the store, you see a variety of creepy items. I'll start with the bones, just like I have done with the bottles and whatnot. I made a bath of 2 different alcohol inks. I used the 2 colors I used are slate and willow. One gives you kind of a brownish color, one gives you kind of a greenish. And these bones were white, so I first soaked them in the slate, and I just let them soak for a while so they would get darker, and I just swish them around in there. And I also add the alcohol blending solution just to make it thin out a little bit more. And then I pull those out, let them dry, and then I drop them into the second color, the willow, very quickly and pull it right back out, because I don't want the color, the first color, to completely get covered, and I don't want the 2 colors to blend. I want to get a combination of colors, and you can see in the picture here how that turns out. So the important thing is just let the first one soak so you really cover up the white, and then put it in the second color and pull it really quickly. And then of course let those dry, and then the last step is to add some flecks of red for blood. For the meat, I'm going to be blending clay again, polymer clay, and I used a darker red, a lighter red, and the white. The white is the fat in the meat, and just like with the green squash, I chopped it up into little pieces and then made a ball out of it, decided whether or not I thought it was blended enough. And in this case, I decided 1 blending was plenty. I didn't want to, if you blend it too much, you know, you're not going to see all the separate colors. So after doing it 1 time, I just made it into a ball and then baked it and then sat it, kind of an oblong ball, and then put it on the scale that you see there. And then when it comes to the ground meat, that's a little miniature grinder, which was all silver, and I painted some of it black. And then what I did to get the meat to look like it had gone through a grinder, I used a clay extruder. And here you can see I did the same blending for this clay as I did for the other. And the only difference is I put it in the extruder and used one of the little dies that it comes with. And here you can get an idea of what it all looks like, and all the different dies. It comes in really handy, and it's very cheap. I think I bought mine on Amazon for like $14. So that's how you get that kind of a look. And then of course I shaped it and then glued the one end to the front of the grinder where the meat would come out. And then finishing it off, you've also got you've got the book by Mr. Cleaver, the cookbook, and then on the board there you see a hammer and a brain, and the brain is just an eraser. It has a hole in the bottom so you can stick the eraser onto a pencil. All I did was I painted it gray and then also put a little brown on it and then flicked the red for blood. I cut a hole or a slit in the top of it, and that's where the cleaver went in. Now for the Terrible Tina's tasty treat stand. The first thing I want to talk about is the suckers that are in containers. Those come from some sets of polymer clay canes, slices. So they're sliced and they're already baked, and you can see the 3 different sets I used for different things, and I used bits of those for each of the suckers, and they're mounted on a straight pin and painted. The pin itself is painted white. Then the cake is made out of polymer clay. I started by cutting multiple discs with a cutter in black and stacking them and then baking it. And the reason I went ahead and baked it is that way when I add the other stuff to it, I won't mess up the shape of the cake. Then I also cut a strip that in black that I wrapped around so that you didn't see all the stacks. So I did that wrapping and then I baked it again. And the next thing I did was cut out the icing. Now I measured from one end, one side of the cake all the way across to the other side of the cake to see what the circumference of the cake was. And then I cut a circle that was that circumference. I think it was 2.5 inches. And then I wanted the icing not to cover the whole cake. I just wanted it to kind of cover part of it so you could still see the black. And so then I took an X-Acto knife and I cut around the edges so that I have an uneven shape. I then put that on the cake and then used my fingers to smooth it all out and then baked it again. Then the spider, which is pretty simple, is just starting with 2 balls of black clay, putting them together and then just pinching the small one so that you kind of have a little bit of an elongated face. And then for the legs, you want to make 8 legs, and I just rolled out clay and then cut it into lengths that were all the same, and just push them together and make a little hump, and then leave one side of that flat of the foot, and the other side you want to smash down the end so it's kind of like a place for it to sit. Now I baked those separately and then I glued them on after the fact. And then for the eyes, those are just little circles of red polymer clay. And then once I added those, I baked them. And then, like I said, the last thing I did is I glued the legs in place. For the basket of severed fingers, I started by rolling out a piece of clay, cutting it. I cut a bunch of them so they will all be the same size. And then I kind of smushed one end of it for the fingernail. And then I made some cut marks in the finger to represent the wrinkle part that you have in your knuckles. And then I had a separate piece of clay that is going to be the green fingernail. And so once I got that done, I put the green fingernail on the finger, and then I used some chalk to paint, to just dust onto where those creases are, just to make those areas look darker than other areas. And that's it. And then stick them all in the basket and glue them in place. The ghosts at the top are just made by making 3 balls of white clay. Make the bottom one the biggest, the middle one the second biggest, and the third one the same as the second, because you're going to need a little bit more clay to pull it and loop it. So I made the balls, then I just smushed one on top of the other, the bottom, and smushed the second one on. And then for the third one, I smushed it so it'd be fat, and then I elongated it like a Hershey's Kiss, and took that piece at the top and just kind of twisted and twirled it. And then I painted on the eyes and the mouth. And when I'm doing really tiny painting like that, I use a toothpick. I just find that's a lot easier to be more accurate and to work in a smaller area. Now down on the left side, you see a bucket of eyeballs. Those are just round balls of green clay with a round piece of white and then a round piece of black on top of that. And then I bake those. And then for the cookies, just like I did for the polymer clay lids for some of the jars, I just punched out a bunch of round red circles, and then I put little bats on them, and those bats came from one of those cane sets. So those things were very useful in terms of just anywhere where you want to add a little detail. Here we have Cadaver and Digger with their bones. The bones are the same bones that you saw in the sink. And this wheelbarrow comes just as it looks like. And then I added the sign on both sides, and then of course the 2 characters of Cadaver and Digger. Here we've got 2 skeletons playing checkers. The one skeleton is sitting on a barrel, which I stained like I've been staining all the other wood pieces. The other one is sitting in a chair. Then the board is sitting on 2 of the crates, just like you've seen before with the inside of the store. And then I had couple pieces of chipboard that I cut and stacked them up to make it thicker, and then covered it with the wood paper. And then the board itself is in the digital image set. And the checker pieces that you see are, again, from those cane sets. They're just the perfect little size. And then they've each got a beer. And the eyeballs are eyeball beads from my stash. And then what I do to position them how I want them, because they come pretty stiff, is I cut them at their joints and then glue them back together in whatever position I want using E6000. Now we've got the skeleton sitting on the bench reading a newspaper, and next to him is a bag of groceries and then his pet spider. The spider is just something from my stash, and I just made him a little collar with the chain. And then of course some of the products that you see inside the store in the bag. The bag can also be found in the digital image set. And then I fixed him so he had one leg crossed over the other, and then he's got another leg or arm that is holding a newspaper. The hat on his head is another eraser, just like the brain was, with a little hole in the top and the bottom of it so you could put a pencil in it. And I just took a sharp pair of scissors and cut away as much of the eraser as I could underneath so that it would fit on his head. And of course, he's got eyeball beads for eyes as well. I hope you've enjoyed this video and that I have inspired you to make a market of your own, or at least to maybe get some benefit from some of the things that I've showed you that you could apply to other projects. Below in the description area, I will have a link to my blog, which has the supply list, more pictures, and the free images. I'll also have the links below to other things that I've mentioned in the video in terms of products, and my other video that talks about making the candles and the candle faces.